Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
The United States Census of 1790 was the first census of the whole United States, and it's mandated by the Constitution. We'll visit with census employees Kathy Lacey and Lily Griego to discuss the importance of the 2020 census for Wyoming, how the census will be conducted in our state, and new tools the census will use to ensure a complete and accurate count. The 2020 census, next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for Wyoming Chronicle is provided in part by a grant from AARP, serving the needs and providing real possibilities for the over 50 population in Wyoming. AARP Wyoming, proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And we want to welcome you to this special Wyoming Chronicle on the census, and more in particular, how important the census is to Wyoming. And with us are Kathy Lacey. Kathy's the regional director of the Denver region of the U.S. Census. Kathy, welcome to Wyoming Chronicle. And Lily Griego. Lily is a partnership coordinator for Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana for the census.
Sir.
Welcome to you both. So as we begin our discussion on the census, really billions and billions of dollars of federal money is at stake. The pie is one size, but it's the slices of the pie that change, and that's why the census is important to Wyoming.
Exactly. So there are $675 billion that are distributed yearly based on census counts. So it's really critical that this once-in-a-decade count is indeed accurate, because as you said, that $675 billion, and some people say it's more than that are coming into the state of Wyoming, it really does fund a tremendous amount of various programs, grants, infrastructure, schools. It really gives you an idea of that funding that directs where it needs to be spent.
And we have a lot of questions about the census, and I think a lot of people have some personal questions, and we're going to get into those as we get through our interview today. But when will the census be conducted? What can people expect?
So we're really excited. One of the things that I'd like to mention is we've been working on this for a long time, and as a newer census employee, my first census ever, I'm really honored to work with people who've been working on this since 2010, literally, taking some lessons learned from the road and...
Literally a decade of prepping for this
Absolutely.
census.
And so I've been on the road about a year and a half, and we've been engaging folks across the state of Wyoming to engage in complete count committees, in partnership, and really doing our due diligence to create a sense of awareness and education about why the census matters to every single person in the country, let alone in Wyoming.
So what are people going to see in their mailboxes? When are they going to start to hear ads? And what are they going to hear? And what are they going to see?
Okay, so beginning the mid-January, people will hear the first educational ads. And it's really talking about to the local area, why is this important to the state of Wyoming? Why should people be counted? So it's that educational phase of our national contract. So during the month of March, that's when people will be receiving their invitation and or questionnaire. And for people who are in areas where the Postal Service does not deliver, we'll hand
that's
deliver.
by mail?
Yes, there's a group that's by mail. If we can't deliver it by mail, we'll be hand delivering. Then that will be our call to action. You've received your census form. Where were you? What's your usual residence as of April 1st? And it's a simple questionnaire, and it only has about 10 questions. And it's really just, what's the makeup of your household? Easier than a credit card application.
Not as scary as a credit card application.
No, not as scary, because we don't ask income on that question.
I think that's an important thing that we can talk about. And this data, I think, in today's world, maybe even different from just 2010.
Exactly.
We're in a different world, and I think some people are more concerned about their privacy and their data. Why should this be a concern of people when they're filling out their census forms?
I'll tell you, it's definitely a concern for the Census Bureau. I mean, our reputation is based on our ability to keep people's information confidential. Even though the questionnaire, if I were to interview you, then that questionnaire is just, so here's your address, is it correct? Who are all the people living and staying in your household? What's their relationship to one another? Their age, their date of birth, are they Hispanic origin? What's their race? What's a phone number in case we, didn't get something right? So it's a very, very short questionnaire. But if we are not able to keep that information confidential, then we're not going to have public trust. In those other 9 years, as we say, we're out there collecting those economic indicators that are used, such as employment, unemployment, crime statistics, health statistics, the Consumer Price Index, as well as the American Community Survey, which is critical for planning for the state and local communities, that's really layered on top of that once-in-a-decade census counts. And that's really critical for every community.
So suffice it to say, this data is not for sale. It's,
Absolutely not.
It's not available to others, and it's used by the federal government for census purposes.
For census purposes, and if people want to check it out, you can go onto the Census Bureau's website, and what you're going to see is the statistics. Any personal information about individuals is stripped from that data. So you can only see that breakdown, but only in statistical purposes, and only at a high enough level that we're able to ensure that people's confidential information is not released. I mean, we take this so seriously that if you called me and said, okay, I sent my form in, what did I put on it? I can't tell you. I can't even tell you what I put on my own census form.
And you couldn't research to tell you.
I can't. All I can see is, did you send it in or did you not? And I care because if you didn't, I'm going to send someone to your house to collect that information.
So is that the only way the census is conducted? I get this form in the mail and I have that. Are there other tools now that are available for you to conduct the census?
That's a great question. So I'm really honored that we're part of the first, what I would say, advanced census. So
Yes.
This is the first census ever offered online. And I think that goes hand in hand with your question about protection of privacy. So we have 4 opportunities to respond to the census. We really want to focus on the first 2, which will be the mail. As Kathy mentioned, it'll be dropping in the mail across the country in March, essentially in 4 waves. But folks can go online and fill it out. And what we're really excited about that the partnership program has done is establish partnerships across the country to include Wyoming. So let's just say a hypothetical example could be that you get your form in the mail, you have a special identification number, you could go to the library if you don't have a computer at home, or if you don't have the internet services, a Wi-Fi provider, you could go down to the local library or stop by a cafe where you have some Wi-Fi, take care of this on your phone, take care of this on a laptop and an iPad, literally be done with this. And it's just a huge, huge part of history to show, again, what Wyoming looks like. It's also an opportunity to have some sense of civic duty to comply and make sure that we're fulfilling our constitutional mandate.
And some people may not realize this is a constitutional mandate.
This is the first time in my life I've been able to say that my job is dictated by the actual Constitution. And I think it's really a cool thing to participate in a nationwide endeavor that has such a local level impact on the results for a decade, not just for a short period of time. It's every single year that $675 billion comes into local communities. And when we drive around Wyoming, whether we're in Gillette or we're in Jackson or we're in Cheyenne or Casper, I know local communities are anxious to be part of this census.
And you drove on an interstate that's built with federal dollars.
Absolutely.
Absolutely is important. But people are not required by any means that they do not need to have a smartphone, they do not need to have a computer, they don't have to go to the library. They can just take care of this on a paper form.
Absolutely. You know, I joke, my mother is not going to go on the internet. She is not going to call and get assistance. She will do it when her paper form comes in the mail, and she'll be sure, because she's afraid of me, she'll complete the census and she'll mail it back. But she's not going to choose those other 2 options. We have just increased the options that every household has for responding to the census.
Do you worry about people duplicating? I did my thing online, but I have this form. Should I mail it into?
So this is where a unique identifier. So every one of the forms or invitation has a unique identifier. We match that up to what we call our master address file. That's our inventory for all the housing units within the state of Wyoming. So when people, if they use that ID, it matches up. So one cancels. So we only take the information once. It's also the tool that I use to know that I have information for every household for the state of Wyoming.
Do you ever find the case that people are afraid to report some people in their household? for whatever reason?
Right, we do, and usually with HUD housing, there are people are afraid to let others know that they have, a couple of extra people living in their household. This is the one time where people really need to be honest about the number of people living in their household. So if there is a housing shortage, this is where you identify that. If people are looking for those grant dollars, if they choose only to put 2 people and not the 8 people, that's going to hurt them that 10 years down the road. We have to remember this is confidential. I am not, nor is the Census Bureau, giving this information to other government agencies. So we're kind of like the Roach Motel. So we do take information from other government agencies, but we're not giving them our information about any individual household. So it's safe.
And there, along those lines a little bit, there was some confusion earlier in the year about the president's request to have a citizenship question on the census. It's been decided that that question is not part of the census.
That is
there
absolutely
still some confusion out there about that? And for non-U.S. citizens, how do they participate in the census?
Okay, we have to remember that the Constitution says we count everyone. So if they're in the U.S., then we need to make sure, and as usual residents, that they should be included in our counts. The form is not going to ask, are you a citizen or not? It doesn't distinguish that at all. So it's just a count. So some people are concerned, but this is the one time where you really do need to be honest about what's going on in your housing unit. Again, it's confidential. It's not being released to anyone.
And impacts everything from schools to healthcare to
Absolutely.
everything in your community, not somewhere else.
Exactly. We do it on a national basis, but this is a local census, and the information is used by the local area, and we want to make sure, I like to think we're the truth tellers of the nation. We want to make sure you're dealing with the true facts for the next 10 years.
As you know, Wyoming is a very rural state, and there are areas I can imagine that are going to be very, very difficult to count. How do you approach those areas?
So I've mentioned the partnership program very briefly, and that's what I manage for Wyoming. So we have partnership specialists. They're hired locally. So these are folks that already know the community. They live there. They know the unique nature of the community, whether it's about demographics or whether it's about the weather. So the wind and the snow during the winter is a real thing in Wyoming.
It very much is.
Yeah, so we don't want to bring folks in from out of state
Sure.
to do this work here. We want to hire locally so that folks have a good understanding of our engagement process. Our engagement process really seeks one main thing, and that's to increase self-response rates for the census. The more accurate data usually comes from someone self-responding, so providing their own answers. And so our partnership program looks to create not just partnerships, but complete count committees, and they're volunteer organizations that come together to educate the community and really focus on what we identify as hard to count populations. Some folks may call it a vulnerable population, some may...
A homeless group.
Absolutely.
Comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Sure.
So some of the
senior citizens maybe.
Yes, absolutely. And you and I spoke briefly about Wind River Reservation. So even engaging what the census calls tribal, what community could call indigenous or native communities, we want to make sure that we're directly engaging with folks from the Census Bureau to say this is why this is really important to you. And you talked about your fair share of the pie, but also not just the technical criteria of when the census is going to happen again in March, and Census Day is officially April 1st, but how it's going to take place within the rural areas. Now, 2010, two populations that really stood out as hard to count were children under the age of 5 and rural populations.
Let's take those individually. Why children
Sure.
under the age of 5?
It can be a variety of factors, and I really like that Kathy was just talking about this. So, especially now, this census has been highly unique in comparison to previous censuses. And one of the things that we found commonly, the household dynamic can be very different. So, for example, I could have my mother living with me, and we've been called the sandwich generation, and I could have my son and his wife and their brand new baby living with me. So it could be a common mistake to think, I've gotten the census form, I'm going to fill out the form for myself and mail it back and I'm done. However, the census wants to know who's inside of your household. And this is where the civic duty comes in to say, okay, I want to count for everyone in my population, everyone in my community, but then the sense of fear of sharing information. This is really important for renters, for folks who may be living with a government assistance. They may be fearful to share out that information if they're not supposed to have someone in their house. And we advocate for this is for the benefit of the community, and again, the information would never be shared out. So therefore, I would fill out the form for myself, whether on the phone, on the internet, or the paper form, and then I would go on to the next person and list my mother, the next person list my son, and then after that, his wife, and then make sure to count the baby after that. So under the age of 5 is a very vulnerable population that we want to make sure to account for, because when we do the 2030 census, these young kiddos are going to be, almost close to junior high age.
Yep. And then rural areas.
Absolutely. Rural has unique dynamics. So our region, one of the things I love about our region is that we have the Rocky Mountain region. So while our team is out on the road and they're traveling from city to city, they get the benefit of seeing how beautiful this geography is. However, it presents different challenges to different communities. We were driving out here and we noticed just on the drive from the first stop that we came to this meeting with you, our internet service kept dropping. So if we're encouraging folks to go online and fill out the census, and we really want to see that push in March of 2020 to the internet, we want to make sure that we've provided every opportunity to make sure that the 2020 census is accessible to every single person across the country, especially in rural places like Wyoming. And that's why we have those backup options, so to speak, of the internet, but then you can dial in by phone. And I like to date myself just a little bit. I like to think I'm in between different generations. I still remember the landlines and I still remember the spin dial. And so if you want to just pick up the phone and call in, you can do that as well in English and 12 other languages.
What does it mean to be living in the household? My family member is with us 3 months a year or 4 months a year and happens to be with us on April 1st. But the other 7 or 8 months is somewhere else. What does that mean?
So what you're looking for is where are people the majority of the time. So I pick on my cousin for this question. For a while there, she was in Oklahoma 3 months out of the year. She was in Arizona 4 months out of the year, and I don't know where she was for the other time. But we actually figured out that 4 months is the longest she was anywhere, so she needed to be counted in Arizona. So we usually say 6 months and a day, but it doesn't always apply if you are living in different locations. So for those other months, it's your usual residence. So I'm assuming they live one place those other months. And if that's the case, that's where they would be counted.
What role do libraries and maybe church and faith-based organizations play in the census, or do they have a role?
Actually, libraries are way more important to this census. I mean, libraries are extremely important to census, period. But this time, any of the libraries that have the computer equipment, again, it's just 10 questions. So people can easily go access the internet and complete their form through libraries. And we have tried to partner with libraries across the state, and that's worked out extremely well.
We've heard the term undercount. Do we know whether Wyoming's been undercounted in the past and what it may have cost the state?
Well, for the state of Wyoming, we actually do a survey to evaluate the Census Bureau's accuracy. And for the state of Wyoming, it was statistically insignificant for the undercount for the state of Wyoming.
In the 2010 census?
For the 2010 census.
So we did pretty well.
Yes, we did pretty well. Now, if you look down at the lower levels, you're going to see differences. And we do have that information on our website. But at the state level, it was statistically insignificant.
Some people are watching this and are wondering, are you hiring?
Absolutely, okay. And I'll do the manage expectations here. Okay. So the majority of the positions that we hire will be working, and this is throughout the entire state, is for our update leave operation, where we'll be delivering the questionnaires and updating our address list in those areas where the Postal Service does not deliver. And that's our first operation. That's going to be going on during March, and we'll be hiring in January for that particular operation. So the next big operation is our non-response follow-up operation. That is where we go back to the homes that we did not receive a response to to complete that operation, and we'll be hiring for that late January, February, and then that operation actually occurs in May.
Out of curiosity, what is that non-response rate? What do you statistically plan for?
Okay, so I'll tell
We
you.
hope it's small.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So it's interesting for the state of Wyoming. I believe you had a 74% response rate in 2000. In 2010, it was down to 69%. So I'm kind of hoping, expectation-wise, that the participation rate will be closer to what you had in 2000, being a 74% response rate, and then we just go back to that 26% of the housing units.
Will you be advertising will people expect to see advertisements in their social media feeds as well? Will you be using that as a tool?
Absolutely. So we have a national communications campaign, the census. There are 3 phases. The first phase is going to begin mid-January, and that's just educating people. And traditionally, we have used TV, radio, and newspapers. We have expanded significantly to include that social media because that's what people are looking at. Who watches a commercial anymore? I know I don't if I can help it. So we do have a large social media blast. This time, again, it starts mid-January. Then the call to action is going to be in March when people receive their questionnaire. And then in May, it's watch out. We have census workers that are out there. So it's just helping people to know that we're out in the field and, we're the good guys, and help us do the best for your local community.
Let's talk about the hurdles that you anticipate. What is your biggest concern, really, as this census is coming upon us?
I tell you, the one thing that keeps me up at night is ensuring that we have enough people to get the census done. Again, when you're looking at an unemployment rate of 3.4, in Wyoming we had certain areas last census that were very difficult to staff, but it doesn't compare to what we have going on this census. So 2.4 basically means everyone who wants a job has a job. So finding people that are looking to part-time job, when we look at our non-response follow-up operation, we need to have people out there when people are at home. So we're a great second job for people who are looking for additional employment for a very limited amount of time.
You train.
Absolutely. We train, we pay you from the time that you leave your home. You do your work assignment and you go home. You get mileage. You get, the hours for travel.
How long might this job last? Do we know?
It's 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks.
It's not a long-term commitment, but it's still an opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you're looking to pay off those Christmas bills, we're a great way to do that. We love the retired population. Generally, they have an amazing work ethic. We love retired people. So if they're interested, we love volunteers, people who are helping their community. The only difference is we'll pay them for coming to work for us.
And go ahead.
I was going to add, too, that I think that my concerns are a tad different, although complementary, so to speak, if that's not a funny thing to say when you're talking about concerns. I would say, and I know my team has heard me say, if we could just have more hours in the day. There is so much ground to cover with speaking to people about why does the census matter to me? Take a really simple question. Why should I fill it out? So talking to my mom was really fascinating about the census when I first took this job. Thinking about seniors, she was unaware that her participation in the census is a community endeavor that she is on the road. She is using hospitals. She's using health clinics. She may need some sort of government assistance at some point in time. But all of the advantages to getting a fair piece of the pie, as you said, or being part of this endeavor, it leads back to a community effort. So her misgiving was, well, you're not in school anymore. Her grandkids are out of school, so she didn't really see how it played a role, and she equated it kind of to taxes, which it's not the same. And it's not just limited to one venture of our lives. Like the minute you walk out the door, we love to do this with our complete count committees. How do you use census dollars in your daily commute? How do you, from the time you get up in the morning to the time you go to bed, what have you touched that's touched census dollars?
People would be amazed.
And it's sure. Eye-opening. It's fascinating stuff. And we just also had a call that we were talking with the community of veterans and military. So as a civilian, I was continually engaged. It's at the military as the active duty members. of who we're so grateful to have in our communities, and then our veterans. And they said, well, you know, the government has a lot of our information already. And I said, but you still need to fill out your census form.
Because it's not the same.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So if we could have literally more hours in the day to do more education, that's my concern at night, which is why I would like to just really extend a huge debt of gratitude to our local partners and our state partners in Wyoming, because they are literally, as Kathy said, they're doing this with us.
Right.
Those that have recognized the importance and the magnitude of the results for the next decade have joined us in this endeavor, and we need all the help we can get.
The work of the Census Bureau doesn't end, say, June 1st of 2020. It goes on. What happens after the census is complete?
So as far as the census data, you know, the regional offices, we're responsible for collecting the information, and then the count from the census is delivered to the president on December 31st. After that, in March of 2021, is when the redistricting data starts to come out, and that's when the local governments start to utilize and see, boy, how'd that come out? But our regional office continues year in and year out. So I think I said earlier, any of the programs that you hear or the statistics that you hear generally come from the Census Bureau. One day someone said, you know, why do you need a census? I can just look at the back of the Rand McNally map. Guess what? That comes from the Census Bureau. So if you don't have the Census Bureau, you're not going to get that. But also the employment, unemployment rate, crime statistics, health statistics, consumer price index. That information comes from the work that the Census Bureau does the other 9 years. And we have people right here in Wyoming collecting that information.
Let's review the questions as we kind of sum things up here. Again, what are you asking people to respond to?
Basically, what we're looking for is for people, one, to verify their address. Two, we want to know everyone who's living and staying in that household. Verify that this is their usual residence. And then we ask, did we miss anybody? Because we want to make sure we get the 0 to 5 children. And then we're asking for, what is their relationship to one another? We're asking for their race, their date of birth, their age, are they of Hispanic origin, and basically their phone number. This is very quick and easy. It's just a snapshot of what their household looks like on April 1st.
It's interesting, as I discussed this with different colleagues around Wyoming, some are fearful that Wyoming maybe has lost population in some areas, which they believe makes the census even more critical, that Wyoming is fully counted. So Kathy Lacey and Lisa Griego, thank you so much for talking all things census for Wyoming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Funding for Wyoming Chronicle is provided in part by a grant from AARP, serving the needs and providing real possibilities for the over 50 population in Wyoming. AARP Wyoming, proud to support Wyoming PBS.